Hello. Welcome to Divorce, Not Murder, the podcast where we hopefully make divorce more appealing than homicide. I'm your host, Kristina Ivy, mental health therapist, mom of two, and new addition to the ranks of the recently divorced. We've also got Robert Taylor here, Idaho-based divorce attorney and step-parent extraordinaire. Hi, Robert. How are you?
Hey, Christine, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. We're on different
Awesome.
coasts, aren't we?
We are. I'm on the East Coast.
It's a little bit of a different recording today.
That is correct. We're literally across the country and looking at each other. Like technology is amazing.
It's a beautiful thing. It really is.
Yes. Yes. I'll stick my computer out the window and you can see the Atlantic Ocean, and then you stick yours out the window and I'll see the Pacific Ocean.
I love it.
Yes.
I actually wish I were near the ocean.
I know. Well, you're like an
I
hour away.
was recently, though. I was
How
near
was
the
that
ocean
for your
recently.
40th birthday? Happy birthday, by the way. Am I
Thank
allowed to tell
you.
people that you're 40?
Sure. I
All
earned
right.
those years, dang it. No,
Yes.
it was good. I mean, the weather cooperated. You couldn't have asked for better weather in February on the Oregon coast. It was in the high 50s, low 60s, sunny, beautiful. I gorged myself on seafood and drank more wine than was necessary, and had a good time. Yeah,
Awesome. Sounds like the perfect 40th celebration.
it was pretty good. Have you been
Awesome.
up to anything recently that you want to share with folks?
Not that exciting. Not as
No.
exciting as turning 40 and going to the coast and drinking lots of wine. I'm sure you said other stuff, but that was the part that stuck out.
Well, then, what sort of podcast related business would you like to talk about today? Do you have something on your mind for our listeners?
I do. I think I've answered this question like 4 times this week, maybe like two to be honest, and a couple times last week. But I've had a lot of conversations about separate property and how to keep separate property separate through the
Mm,
length of the marriage, and I kind of thought that would be a fun topic to just kind of do a short deep dive into
yeah.
this evening.
Well, let's get to like the basics actually. So what's the difference between separate and community property?
Yeah. So in Idaho, separate property is anything that you had prior to the marriage, anything that you inherit either before or during the marriage, it doesn't really matter. And then any gift received, again, before or during the marriage, it doesn't really matter. So community property is everything else. And so in Idaho, the law assumes that any property acquired during the marriage is community property. Now we got to decide what to do with it, unless the other person can say, this is my own separate property, and then demonstrate that it is, in fact, their separate property, which has the impact of excluding it from that distribution between the two parties of the community.
Yeah, so how would you do something like that? Like say somebody received a pretty big gift, like they received their family heirloom grand piano and like it's coming to the dissolution of property at the end. How do you do that accounting?
Yeah, so I mean, if the piano is a gift or inheritance, that's pretty easy. It's their piano. And sometimes I have clients say things like, well, I'm going to keep my retirement and she's going to keep her inheritance. I don't want any of it. And it's like, well, I'm glad you feel that way, but you don't really have an option. You're not getting any of it. And by the way, it doesn't count in the distribution of your retirement. It just off the table completely. It's going over to her pile. And now we're going to figure out what to do with everything else.
Do they have to do things like how would you establish to the court like this was my separate property? How do you keep separate property separate?
That's a good question, Christina. The so if you want to claim that it's separate property, then it's on you to demonstrate to the court. We call that tracing, and you have to like literally backstep all the way through from where you acquired the property through either of those methods, and then demonstrate where all those funds went in since the marriage began. I mean, definitely if you have a prenup prior to getting married or even a postnup, like that can identify like these are the accounts that I had, or I had this money, or I had this house, or whatever the case is with the prenup. But really, kind of like I would say best practices for separate property is if you like best case scenario, if you're getting a gift from somebody, inheritance are pretty a little easier because there's the will, somebody's in charge of that estate, they are given out the whatever it is, the item, the money, they have to account
Mhm.
for the estate. So that kind of makes a record. And then it's like kind of easy when it's like, oh yeah, grandma died and she got X, right? Um, but
Yeah.
the the good way to do it with the tracing is like, hey, I got this gift and I'm if that person would write gift on the check, that could be helpful. A deed of gift, write a letter that says, hey, I am gifting you this. Um, and then you put that in an account and you keep it separate, like it's your own account and you use it for kind of your own things and you maybe buy a house, whatever you use that for, and the proceeds of that separate property or those assets would be separate property, for the remainder of that time. What gets a little tricky is you got an inheritance and you put it in an account, and
Like a
then six
joint
months,
savings account.
yes, absolutely. Or, 6 months from now, you're writing checks out of that account for the benefit of the community, and you're going through it, but at the same time my paycheck's coming into that account, my wife's paycheck's coming into that account, and the
Mhm.
money's up and down, and maybe it's been 10, 15, 20 years, and at one point you had $50,000 of separate property, but now it's been 15 years and we've both been putting every paycheck we've had, bought a car, sold a car, all the money went into there, the mortgage, all that stuff. And now it's 15 years later, and maybe that account, you know, I've seen if maybe that account has $200,000 in it, and everyone says, "Well, yeah, that's right, you had the 50, right?" But maybe that account now has $10,000 in it. And then, like, well, hey, what do we do at that point? And that can be a little tricky.
That seems like that would be a pretty common problem because so many people in a marriage they start to really commingle their income, their finances, even debts and things like that. What are some other like common problems you've seen in trying to deal with separate and community property when they've been mixed up like that?
Yeah, so I've seen a couple of times just this week, or once where maybe a parent would give the kids when they get married a gift, or hey, you guys are going to buy a house. I want to give you $50,000. I want to give you $100,000. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. It's never happened to me, but it's happened to some people. And so, yep, we're getting married. Here's $100,000. And then we buy a house. Now it's 10 years later. We're getting divorced. And it's not uncommon for that one, whoever's parents it is to say, well, they gave that gift to me. They didn't give that gift to the community,
Mm.
and so like say we've got a house, we got to sell it. If that's $100,000 is separate property, you can take that 100,000 off the top and split what's left. Otherwise, you're going to typically divide the house equity in half. So I mean, it is a significant amount of money, and so it makes a big difference. And it's okay. Whatever party is claiming that it's separate property is going to have to demonstrate to the court that it is separate property, and like that check was written 15 years ago. Where's the check? No one knows, or where
And
was
nobody
that
wrote
check?
gift on it.
Yes. And maybe the person that wrote the check's no longer alive, to testify
Mm.
as to what their intent was. Or, maybe it went to an account that was with my name only account that I had prior to being married. And maybe I got that check the week before we got married and it's been in that account. And then we, got married and we bought a house a month later and I wrote the check from that account. That's going to look a little different than, we got married 3 months later, got that $100,000 check. We put it in the account. We kind of wanted to see what the market was doing. And then 6 months later, we bought a house, but we also,
Mhm.
went to the Bahamas. I got a car, she got a car, like all these things happened. And then we still wrote that check for maybe $40,000 now because we spent the rest. And then time to get divorced. And it's like, well, hey, is that $40,000 a gift to the community? Or is it to both of us? Or was it a gift from my parents to just me? And having to demonstrate that can be a challenge when that much time has gone by and not much usage on that account.
Yeah. Well, that is interesting because it you said earlier you said something about sort of pre and post nups, right? And maybe you want to share with folks a little bit about that, because it sounds like we're moving in the direction of like, now that people have commingled their finances and there's these issues around tracing and keeping separate property separate and community property for these sort of accounting situations. Where does the pre and post nup sort of conversation fit into this?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, the law is going to assume that anything that you acquire during the marriage is community property. And the same thing, if you have an inheritance, you have a gift, you owned it prior to the marriage, you don't really need a prenup to specify that to really protect those rights. Like, that's not going to change. But you can, if you wanted to, identify those at the beginning and make it clear that, like, hey, this is the list of assets or the list of accounts I am bringing into the marriage. And we agree that, should we end up being divorced, that we're going to start with the premise that this is my own separate property. With the
Mm-hmm.
postnup, you're already married, and then you are making that relation or making that agreement that really kind of changes the fundamental law that this is community property. We're almost just like, this is an exception, but we are agreeing that this is my own separate property for whatever reason that you wish to do it. Maybe we have a difference in how we want to spend money or priorities, or that's really, I think there's a lot of reasons for postnups, but that seems to be the most common. Is one party likes to spend the money pretty freely,
Loosey
and the
goosey,
other,
a little
yes,
loosey goosey.
yeah, drinking wine on the coast, and the other party, uh,
Seafood is
you know,
expensive. Thank you very
yeah,
much.
but the other party might want to like save money, save for retirement, save for the house, and at some point come to the conclusion that, like, well, every month we've been married for 15 years. I've acquired $200,000. I've made all the, I've done whatever with the house, and you're got $100,000 of debt, or maybe we should reevaluate and determine what's mine and what's yours, but still continue on with the marriage, which is kind of adjusting those terms.
Mm.
Or maybe you do get an inheritance. Again, I don't know that you need it, but you can identify it. And then if you know what you want to spend it on, maybe you identify that too, just to make it easier down the road. The
Yeah.
the, the other issue that I see gets kind of tricky is with the house, and we have a whole episode on who gets to keep the house. But it's not uncommon for one person to own a house, and then the other person to, hey, we meet and it's going well, like move in. I already own a house, right? So the partner moves
Mm-hmm.
in. Or, maybe we're looking for a house together, but my credit sucks and her credit's really good, so she buys the house. Uh, and then we get married, just a month later or a year later or 3 years later, whatever the case may be. Um, and then we're married. And so the house was purchased prior to the marriage. So that would give the impression that it's likely going to be at the beginning separate property. But we lived in this house for 15 years, and I paid half the mortgage the entire time, or maybe I paid the whole mortgage for 15 years, or maybe it was a
Mm-hmm.
case where uh, we we bought the house together in quotes, but I'm not on the mortgage, I'm not on the deed. We got married the next week, and it's been 15 years, and I feel like it's my house, but we have this deed and this loan that was happening before. So that kind of
The,
gets
the
tricky.
the tracing makes for a different argument there.
Well, that one's really easy to trace. You just look at when it was acquired. But then in that case, though, then maybe, hey, we use community income for 15 years to pay your mortgage. So what does that look like? How do we balance that out? But even then, like, you can look at, and it's just the principle, you know, 15 years is a long time, but look how much of it's just that payment's going to principal. And you're going to divide that in half, and it's going to be a number, and it could be a pretty high number, but maybe that property was bought for 200 grand 15 years ago, and now it's $800,000 depending on where you live. And that number, half of that number, is going to be much bigger than the first number, and that can cause some conflict.
Mm.
Or, what happens sometimes too is that same scenario, either we bought the house together, or I thought it was together, but it's really in your name prior to getting married, or you own the house prior to getting married, moved in at some point in time, and then we refinanced the house together. And at that point, it was added to, the I was added to the deed, and to the mortgage. And at that point, it looks a lot like what was separate property became community property. and now we're getting divorced. And again, maybe that house went from, $200,000 to $800,000. But, when we did that refinance, it was already worth $600,000. And so, there's some serious questions as to, well, is that $600,000 going to be separate property? Are we just splitting the $200,000? Are we splitting all of it? And so that's like a pretty common example where it can get kind of tricky. And a lot of times people don't really remember, or I don't want to say care or know, but like in the what I'm describing, I've lived in a house for 15 years, and maybe I paid
Mm-hmm.
the mortgage, maybe I didn't pay the mortgage directly, but I was paying the power bill, or I was paying the groceries and the car insurance, and my partner was paying the mortgage. But I've lived there for 15 years, and I'm financially committed, and it's my house or it's our house. I live there. And then sometimes you go backwards and see that maybe it's not the case. And that can be an emotional event for people if, not only telling them, hey, this is not your house, but, maybe that $800,000
Absolutely.
house. Yeah. Well, I mean, like physically the house, but also the
Mm-hmm.
financial impacts of, yeah, I know you thought it was $800,000, but it's his house or it's her house. Those are some situations where uh, it gets kind of commingled. But you've asked a question that I want to address before we move on to the next topic. But
Mm-hmm.
you've said like, well, hey, what if you commingle finances? Well, the law doesn't really care in Idaho. Like if you commingle finances, if you've earned the money during the marriage, and it's community income. If you spent it during the marriage, you're spending it as for the assumption of the presumption is on the community. If you're acquiring property during the marriage, it's presumed to be community property.
So
And
even
so it doesn't.
couples who keep separate finances for their own reasons, who have like separate checking accounts and like maybe a joint savings account and kind of seed money that they consider like family money, you're saying that's kind of irrelevant in Idaho, that it's really still viewed as community property.
That's correct. So, like, my wife and I have not commingled finances. She has her own account. She has a job. Money goes there. I have my own account, same account I've had since I was probably 17. All the money I've ever earned in my life goes to that account, and it doesn't matter. It's community income. It doesn't matter that they're not touching. Now, I mean, we do have our own agreement who pays what, and that's not an issue, right? But let's just say, maybe I make more than her, maybe in this scenario. I don't want to use a scenario where she's paying all the bills and I'm saving all my money there, right? But maybe I make more than her, so I have more to save each month. And now I want to take that savings and go buy a house. And I'm going to use that house as a rental, and it's going to be awesome. And then, I bought a $200,000 house. Now it's a $500,000 house. So I take $300,000 out and I buy another house, and it's like I'm playing Monopoly. And now we're getting divorced, right? And she is going to be like, hey, that's all community property. It doesn't matter. Like, hey, we're not going to trace it at that point.
Okay.
It's all going to be community. Now, houses a little bit different. Like I get that's a good example to kind of show because if a couple that's married buys a house together, I mean, at least in Idaho, they're going to assume that it's community property, and one party is going to have to sign a quitclaim deed if that's not the case. And so with the quitclaim deed, you're giving away your interest to that property to the other party.
That's what a
And
quit
so,
claim deed is it's basically just saying I have no stake in this anymore. I have no claim to this.
well, it's not that I don't have a stake to this. It's that I am conveying whatever interest I have in this property to you. And so the end
Got it.
result is I have no interest in this property at the end of the day. So now, I mean, from a practical standpoint, if I do go buy another house, they're going to say, you're married. Where's your wife at? And she's either going to have to sign that quit claim deed or it's going to be community property. And so
Hmm.
that's another way where you could, not commingled or commingled, but I want to keep this separate property. And sometimes that happens, right? Like, hey, I really want to, I save my money and I want to spend my money on this and I want to go do that stuff. And maybe my wife's a saver, but maybe she wants to take a vacation every month or every other month to exotic places and see
I
stuff, right?
knew
We
I
just
liked
have
her.
Yes, or she would love nothing more than to travel all the time, which is our retirement plans. But let's just say, like, whatever extra money she has, she sets aside and she goes travels. Let's just say we don't have kids for this example, right? And whatever money I make and is extra, I set aside and I want to buy houses or I want to collect cars or I just collect things of money, right? Like that's really going to be the issue is value. Nobody cares about who keeps the junk at the end of the marriage. It's who keeps the good stuff. And so that might be an example where either we have the postnup or we're using the quitclaim deed, where like we have an agreement, we have an understanding that how you spend your money is how you spend your money, and how you buy, whatever you buy is yours, and whatever you spend your money on is yours, and whatever she does. And you can do that too at the beginning with the prenup. And that's another benefit of that postnup. If you forgot to do it before, or you didn't realize you had different financial objectives, or you get married when you're poor.
Yeah, you mentioned something that has me intrigued, right? And I think it might be a question that other people who have recently been divorced and then are entering new relationships might have, which is so leaving my divorce in that dissolution of property and settlement agreement, I now have money and income that I'm interested in protecting. And so you end up dating, you end up in a new relationship. You're saying you don't actually necessarily need to do a prenup in the beginning of that if it's very clear that you entered the relationship that you're in with this sum of money.
Yeah. So, I
From
mean,
like a specific proceeding.
like, do you need to? No, but should you? Probably, right? Like it would,
Your
because,
attorney is showing, sir.
well, I mean, like what happens most of the time. This is what I was just saying a moment ago. Like people get married when they're poor. Maybe they're starting off in life, college, high school, whatever it is, and then they acquire wealth or money or whatever throughout their life. And sometimes people change, grow apart, so the interests are different. So you can do a prenup, a postnup. In this case, like you're already established, you're 40. I don't know if we've talked about that enough on this episode.
Thank you.
Would
Thank
you
you for reminding everyone. I appreciate that.
Where you do have like defined retirement accounts somewhere and you have some money
Mhm.
in the bank and all that stuff, and maybe you're also acquired to spending money a certain way, or you have some financial goals, or maybe and I'm not saying this is the case for you, but maybe you came out of a marriage where there was conflicting goals on how to spend the money, and so now you've identified how you want to spend your own money and what you should do, and so it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a prenup. Or you got that retirement account, it's awesome, but any money that you contribute to it during the marriage is going to be community property. And so maybe you don't like that. Maybe you say, hey, look, like I got this account, I just want to keep it over there and keep it separate. And I mean, the other issue too with the prenup is not only the property, but you could also do the debt. So, hey, any debts that you acquire during the marriage are yours. Anything I acquire is mine. And then maybe you don't care how your husband spends the Visa card, you know? Whereas without that prenup, that's community debt. So you're getting divorced, there's $60,000 of credit card debt. Now we got to figure out what we're doing with it, right? You got that prenup, you don't really care because that's
Mhm.
his own separate debt. And so like that's a change to the law that you guys are voluntarily, entering into through either that prenup or the postnup agreement.
So, as a divorce attorney, do you feel like there's this negative stereotype around prenuptial and postnuptial agreements that you wish maybe wasn't there? Because it seems like they're there to protect people and their interests.
They are. I think that like the thing that sticks people up is like this idea that at the beginning of the relationship, why are we talking about what it's going to look like when we get divorced?
Mhm. Borrowing
But
trouble.
really, yeah, but like, and again, I think it's different like at 40 versus 19, where it's like, no, look, we're removing a barrier or removing arguments down the road, right? Like, hey, like, like one time I did have a client whose goal was to have her house paid off before she retired, so she could retire and not have to worry about
Free and
paying the
clear.
mortgage once a month. Yeah,
Yeah.
she had a husband that liked buying tools and pianos and stuff like that, and acquired lots of debt. You know, um, there's a case there where it's like, hey, look, I think maybe they got married young, but like maybe hypothetically these people meet and they're 40 and 42, and they both understand how they want to spend the money, and like, hey, look, I'm not going to convince you that you need to manage your money how I manage my money, and you're not going to convince me to start spending willy-nilly. But I do want to be married to you and enter in this relationship. And so that prenup kind of punches through that. Or, the postnup, the difference there is you're already married, but you're changing kind of the terms of the marriage or the terms of the potential outcome. So you've identified, like, look, I don't like the way you spend your money. Like, I have no debt other than my mortgage, right? Like, it would stress me out if my wife got a new car like every 6 months and just snowballed the balloon payment into the next car and the next car, and now she's got a $25,000 car that she owes 70,000 on, right? Like, that would stress me out.
Yeah.
But if I had a post-nup and it's like, hey, okay, well, that's your separate problem, then maybe that would
And maybe
allow us
you've
to.
actually like preserved the longevity of this second relationship, the second marriage, because you've taken some of the biggest reasons that people get divorced off the table, which is, fighting about finances.
Yeah, and so I think that's a very practical, reasonable way to look at it. But a lot of people are like, "Well, why are we planning for divorce?" And it's like,
Yeah.
why do you need a postnup or a prenup? Like, you just put it away until it's time to get divorced, and then you dust it out. So if you're never planning on using it, why do we need it? And like, that kind of rubs people the wrong way.
Yeah.
We should do a
I think
separate.
that's a really important reframing, though. I think this is really valuable to hear.
I agree. We should do a separate episode on prenups and postnups sometime. That could be a fun topic.
All right. I'm here for it.
Awesome. So we call it a night.
Well, I sure. Is
I
there
don't need.
any last thoughts you had on the property conversation? It sounds like it's come up a lot for you this week.
No, that's a bit the biggest. I would say kind of the key takeaways. Separate properties, anything you had before you were married, any gifts, any inheritance, and then if you ever do want to separate those items from the community, keep in mind during the marriage how you're going to trace them at the end of the marriage, or where the funds are going, how they're being used, whose name's on the account, like all those things. And I've had clients who have received large sums of money from either inheritance or their parents, or whatever the case may be. Again, I don't know what that's like, but they keep them over in this account, Robert's Inheritance Fund. And every time I get a check, I put it in that account, and then I use it on wherever I feel like using it. And there's no question, everybody understands that that's what's happening. And that's a much better position, absent a prenup or a postnup, which are great options, than just taking that check and putting it into the account. And then, especially if the money's spent, right? Like I said earlier, if you have 100,000 and now it's time to get divorced and you have 20,000, what are we going to do about it? It's a little tricky. So I would just say, identify what items or property you think is separate at the beginning or as you receive them, and then kind of look for ways to keep them away from the community or everything else, separate accounts, separate naming conventions, than income and other items acquired during the marriage.
It sounds like great advice, and I'm so glad that you're here to share that with everyone. We appreciate your expertise as always.
Thanks, Kristina.
Yeah.
Have
All
a good
right.
night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.
Divorce, Not Murder is sponsored by Taylor Law Amp Mediation, PLLC. Idaho divorce clients can find Robert at www.taylorlm.com.